and then you'll see it start recording. Okay.
Now, we had a full blast of climate science from some of our best climate scientists in the country. And many of you in the room are familiar with climate science, but we just felt that it was important that we ground this conference in a perspective on climate science. Keep it front and center. Keeping in mind that yes, there are other bodies of knowledge, other bodies of people science, etc. We're now transitioning into, if you like, an attempt to tackle this big challenge. Climate change impacts everything. It impacts our energy systems, our production systems, our consumption systems, our finances, the way we live, how we organize our cities, our towns, everything, okay? And so, as a big complex problem, we also cannot just lobby our way out of this problem. We gotta have a broad vision. We gotta have a big perspective on the big problem, the dangerous problem. And so, the Climate Justice Charter session is about grappling with one way of shifting consciousness, shifting society, and achieving that, or contributing to achieve that social tipping point that we've started talking about. Now, charters are a very interesting political instrument. They have a long history. You can go back to the Magna Carta a couple of centuries ago. But in the 20th century, and particularly in the recent period, charters have become very important in the context of commoning and protecting the commons, land, water, and so on. So for example, commons may not be written down, but the rules to govern it, the norms to govern it, but communities have been able to put these things into place through practice, through social practice. And commoning charters live in the everyday life of people. And we have the challenge of protecting the fundamental foundations of our society, our civilization, and so on. Our water, our forests, our oceans, our biosphere, and so on. In Scotland recently, in an anti-extractivist struggle, the community put together a charter to defend their commons. In Canada, in the context of worsening climate change, climate and indigenous activists put together what is called the LEAP Manifesto. In the context of the Rio Earth Summit and the shift towards sustainable development in the early 90s, we saw the emergence of what is called the Earth Charter. The Earth Charter has not been adopted by the UN, but it is an ongoing effort to push, if you like, a more radical conception of sustainable development. The Cochabamba People's Summit in 2010 in Bolivia, and we all know what's happening in Bolivia right now. There's a racist reaction to indigenous rule in Bolivia. But the indigenous people's movements in 2010 put forward a declaration. And the declaration is really about another way forward for humanity and other life forms. It's a kind of charter. In South Africa, we all know the Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter was a signal moment, a turning point in South Africa's struggle. It provided a different vision for the country. It provided a basis for a programmatic politics. It provided a basis for a strategic politics. But it also helped build unity. But all charters are characterized largely by about four things. They are characterized by their desire for something more, for something different. They want a different vision, another way forward. Okay, so that's a common characteristics amongst all the charters I've mentioned to you. They're aspirational, and they really attempt to embody this sense that another future can be achieved, another future can be reached and built, and so on. The second characteristic about charters, and not all of them share this, is that some of them explicitly put out their objectives or their goals. What are you trying to achieve? Okay. Now, with climate crisis and climate change, well, we have to spell out what are our goals? What do we want to achieve? And there are big issues at stake here. What does it mean to be human in the context of the world we are in today? That's a fundamental question. It's a big question, okay? There is the whole issue around our constitution. Our constitution is a very interesting document, and we can have debates about it. But it is a product of people's struggles, historical struggles in this country. And it can also be an instrument that can be used for the kind of world we want. Okay? Right now, that constitution is being undermined left, right, and center by various forces. So in the way we frame our goals, we want to strengthen our country, the democracy, but we also want to confront the big issues. Now, not all charters do this. The other thing about charters is that they attempt to specify principles. Now, the Freedom Charter, to some extent, embodied some principles, but it really wasn't about principles. And I'll come back to this point just now. But if you read other documents like the Earth Charter, it is framed around principles. And that's very, very important. You read the Mining Charter that's been developed by mining-affected communities. There are principles that shape that, and so on. But they don't do other things in that charter. But principles are very important because they frame your political practice, your approach to change. They're a lens to look at society. They're a lens to look at the problem. They're a way in which you position yourself and define yourself in the struggle, in politics, and so on. It distinguishes you. It gives you an identity. You stand for these principles, and so on. So, the principles issue is very, very important, and we've contained that, or we've expressed that also in this document. The third thing about charters is that they are also about political practices. Now, the Freedom Charter expressed a particular approach to political practice. It made a set of claims. If you read it, you should have read it, claims about a different kind of post-apartheid society. The doors of learning and culture shall be open to all, and so on and so on. Now, that's very, very important. The Freedom Charter also, under each of its clauses, talks about the abolition of certain aspects of the pillars of apartheid. Okay? The end of segregation, the end of influx control, and so on and so on and so on. An undemocratic government, and so on and so on. So it was all about political claims. And that's important. The LEAP Manifesto in Canada is all about political claims. Okay? The charter we've drafted together is also about political claims. But it is also about something more than that. It is also about systemic change. It's about pathways that can be driven by all of us now. Okay, so we don't have to wait for the elites, the carbon elites, to build food systems. We don't have to wait for the elites to start taking control over our water commons, to start community-owned renewable energy systems, etc., etc. So there's something else that's different about what we framed in here together. The other point about political practice is about the state and people's power. And this document that we'll all be engaging with and so on has a relational view on the state. The state is there because of us. We constitute the state. Okay? So what we do on the terrain of civil society, the politics around climate justice, how we take that into politics, into struggle, into society will define the state. And so there's a conception of a particular kind of state we want to reclaim, a climate justice state, a different kind of state from what we have. And then maybe finally to say that what we are hoping from this engagement, and Courtney is going to start kicking off the kind of input on what's in here, is that we want you all to grapple with this question. If we are going to fight for climate justice, if we're going to stand up in society and take on the powerful, those who stand in the way of the change that has to happen, does this give us a signpost, a compass, a way to go forward? So that's something we're going to be interrogating together. So that's just by way of introduction. So over to you, Courtney.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through the introduction, the goals and the principles, and you all have a copy of it, so you can follow if you want. And as Vish said, Jane designed and drew the front cover. And it's got a lot of symbolism in it, so even if you have comments about that, you can tell us. So we start off by saying that we care about the climate crisis and its implications for all who live in South Africa, as well as all life on planet Earth. So this is human and non-human life. And as we've heard from the morning session, with a 1 degree Celsius increase, we really are already seeing and will continue to see worsening weather shocks, so droughts, floods, fires, tornadoes. But what we've also heard is that this irreversible change is not locked in. It is possible for us to make a difference and to change our reality, but this has to happen through climate justice, which means that those who are least responsible for it must not bear the brunt of this climate crisis. So what that means is that we have to also address the root causes of the problem, which I'll go through in a bit. And we need, as the climate justice movement in South Africa, we need to be unified. We need to have something that is all-encompassing. We need clear goals and clear principles that everyone will abide to. And we need alternatives that come from below, which a lot of you are championing. And this is what will lead the climate justice movement and allow us to create a future that will sustain life. So the Climate Justice Charter is, especially if it's done in the way that we've done it in a very participatory manner, is one way to ensure our future. So COPAC, along with the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign and other organizations as well as individuals, have been engaging in this process for this entire year actually. And the process really comes out of food sovereignty and climate justice campaigning by COPAC and SAFC, which started during the drought. So as I said, the process was developed to be a grassroots process. And while it is rooted in climate justice and more food sovereignty, there were a number of processes that have happened over the past year and a half that have allowed this charter to allow us to come to this point. So first of all, in September 2018, we had a water and climate conference, which some of you might have been at. And this was really to launch our water sovereignty activist guide. But it was also to initiate a process for a water justice charter, because we came out of activism around the drought. We felt that South Africa needed a water justice charter. But as soon as that process started, we realized that there's a bigger need in South Africa for a climate justice charter. And something, as Vish said, similar to the Freedom Charter, but appropriate for our time and also appropriate for climate justice and for our current realities. And that's where the decision was taken to start this process for climate justice charter. Throughout 2019, we held, this is how we started it. We had roundtable discussions, which most of you were a part of. We did this with various constituencies. So we started off with drought-affected communities. We then had one with the media, with faith leaders and faith-based organizations, labor, youth, environmental and social justice organizations, which was the last one in September. And this is where the bulk of the discussions happened, when we discussed the need for a charter, we discussed the science, and this is where a lot of the research happened. We also asked throughout 2019 for public engagement, so we had a presence on social media, as well as we had an email address that people could send their comments to. And finally, what we did in recent weeks, months, was commissioning think pieces on various topics. So the purpose of this was to really deepen and strengthen the research and strengthen the thinking. So get people starting to think about climate change and starting to think about the various alternatives that go with climate change. So these think pieces, which you also have, you have a pack of all of them. So they range from community-owned renewable energy to food sovereignty to even how our health system should be. So they really were a range of topics. And throughout all of these engagements, so public think pieces, roundtables, this is where the information was gathered to start writing the charter. So that's where we are now. And so I'm just going to touch on where we want to go with this, because Vish will cover this in more detail tomorrow. But essentially, we want to deepen grassroots engagement with the charter. So before it was, when we had these discussions, we didn't have anything concrete to discuss. Now we actually have something that people can go back to their communities with and look at and support and endorse. So that's where we are today. We are now launching the charter. This is this conference. And we are hoping that organizations will endorse and take us back to the communities to discuss and eventually come back to us with comments and an endorsement. And then any feedback that you get from your communities or constituencies, you can give to the Climate Justice Charter Working Committee, which will be convened by COPAC. Going forward, we want to have further comments through people's assemblies. So for the first few months of 2020, we want this charter to travel the country. So we want activists in this room and outside of this room to hold people's assemblies. And some of those will be done by COPAC, but we shall cover that. But we want these kinds of assemblies, workshops, discussions to happen in workplaces, communities, faith-based spaces, in your churches, in your mosques, just so that we can deepen the input from the grassroots, so that we can be getting alternatives directly from the ground. And all of those assemblies will be concluded by the 1st of May, which is a planned day of action. And again, this will come back to the working committee. And I just want to emphasize the fact that this tool has been and will be written by the people. So we have to make sure that it's informed by the needs on the ground. It has to reflect the concerns of the people and those who are most affected by the climate crisis. So when we actually started, it doesn't say it on here, but when we started with this process, we called it the People's Climate Justice Charter, because that's really what it has to be. So then we are looking at the final version being issued by the end of June 2020, and thereafter until October 2020, this is when we will ask for formal endorsements from various communities, individuals, and organizations. Then in October, we will be convening a People's Parliament, a National Assembly outside Parliament of Cape Town, where we will officially hand over the Climate Justice Charter written by the people, as well as endorsements to Parliament. So then, just ongoing how to get involved, you can, as I said, send it over social media, but also there's an email address in here that you can send any comments to. So this is both for you, who, if you think of something after this conference, you can share it with us, but also give this information to your communities and your organizations, and they can contact us directly. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the actual charter. So we start off by saying that a heating planet threatens all life forms and poses the prospect of the end of our species. So this is not something that's going to happen in the future. It's not an inflammatory phrase. This is our reality. We are facing this. And it has come about because of the destruction of our global commons. So our land, our oceans, our forests, our rivers, our biosphere, our air, have all been destroyed by a system that puts profits before people. So South Africa, along with the world, we are at the point where we have to make a decision. So either we have to continue on with the system that is going to continue to just benefit a few, it will continue to intensify the weather shocks that we have and threaten our very existence, or we can finally end our war with nature and we can develop a society that ensures that all life forms can flourish, so not just human life. And this charter is an attempt to affirm essentially hope, so that we can sustain a future, not just for those in the room, but everyone in the future. But to provide hope, we also have to address what has taken hope away and what has, we have to address our past. So we have to all understand that the dehumanization and the violence and the pollution and deprivation caused by colonialism, apartheid, and even our current market-based form of development. These are the things that will remain a challenge, and these are the things that us as the climate justice movement have to challenge. So as we defend this web of life and stop the climate breakdown, we have to also seek to end race, class, and gender injustice. These things all go hand in hand. And we have to seek emancipation for all, including future generations. To put it simply, allowing a world where we have a 1.5 degree Celsius or hotter increase is simply not an option, because it threatens our the way that the planet works. So I'm going to go into the goals now of the charter. So the first goal of the charter is to affirm our role and responsibility as guardians of life on planet. We have to develop a vision. We need a vision for a country based on climate justice that allows us a flourishing future. The second goal is to advance an awareness that we thrive on Earth when we coexist, and that we have to coexist as people, as various species, and also non-human life. So it's only through unity that we will overcome various injustices, so not just climate injustice, but chauvinistic nationalism, racism, xenophobia, and all forms of discrimination will only be overcome with unity. And it has to be a people's-driven movement. We also have to inspire a break from the old way of thinking. So we have to break with these Western ideas of what growth is, progress and conquest. We have to understand different definitions of growth. It can't be the same definitions that we've been seeing. So we have to finally understand that not everything can be sold and stolen and captured and dominated by the system. We have to learn how to coexist with these things, even if we are not directly benefiting from them in terms of money. The fourth goal is to reconnect with an ancient conception of what it means to be human. So the fact that we are both shaped through and by the power of nature, and we thrive most as humans not by controlling and commodifying nature for profit and economic growth, but when we express solidarity with each other and nature, and when we share with nature and each other, and cooperate and live slowly, and finally that when we are free. That is our ancient conception of living on this planet. We have to move away from the selfish living, greedy living, and competitive, violent way of life that capitalism has convinced us we need in order to be successful. The first goal is to overcome the crisis of political leadership. I think it's very clear that the politicians in this country, and even those to come, are incapable of thinking beyond business as usual. They are not thinking outside of our existing system. They are continuing the system and therefore perpetuating inequalities. So now we have come to the realization that we have to recognize our power as people, and we take on that kind of leadership from below, and that's what the Charter is doing. And the final goal is, as we have heard from Vish and also from this morning, we have the laws in this country and we have a progressive constitution. But now we have to strengthen the democracy that a lot of people fought for, and we have to strengthen our democracy, our constitution, and have transformative constitutionalism in order to overcome the climate crisis. Okay, I am now going to look at the principles for various deep, just transitions. So we look at the fact that all communities, villages, towns, and cities have to work to advance the deep, just transition. And this is not an energy transition, this is a life transition. So these are the principles that we see need to guide the alternative plans and processes towards a deep, just transition in society. So the first one is, quite simply, climate justice. So those responsible for the climate crisis are being harmed the most. Hence, through our work, we have to center the needs of workers, the poor, the landless, and vulnerable communities, and they have to be at the center of processes. So not just activism, but they have to be at the center of mitigation, adaptation, and regeneration. And in addition to that, they can't carry the cost of it. We have to find ways where the benefits of moving towards a new society are felt equally by everyone. The second principle is that of social justice. And Farrell mentioned this earlier, but we have to be very clear on this, that climate justice is social justice. Inequality, poverty, unemployment, and deprivation, those are all things that will be perpetuated with the climate crisis. And those are the people who are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And so as climate justice activists, we have to confront race, class, and gender injustice, and that has to be central to our movement. The third principle is eco-centric living. So we have to begin to live simply, to live slowly and consciously. We have to recognize the sanctity of life forms and really move towards an ethics of respect and care. So again, something that capitalism has deprived us of and has told us you can't be both caring and successful. The fourth principle is that of non-discrimination. So once again, race, class, gender injustice is our fight, and we have to stand against all forms of discrimination if we are going to truly be a just society. The next one is participatory democracy and collective ownership. So now we talk about the actual policies. The policies have to be informed by the voices and needs of all people, especially workers, the poor, landless, and vulnerable communities. They have to be intrinsically involved in the policy making in this new society. And citizens' power has to prevail. So we have to look at the promotion of socialized ownership, including democratic public utilities to provide public goods, commoning, communal land, communal ownership, participatory planning, city planning. And this is why we haven't gone to government and said, you need to write a charter. This is why we as people are writing a charter and they must adopt it. That's how we're doing it. It has to be ground up. The sixth principle is that of solidarity. So we have to unite our struggles. So we have to unite everyone who is fighting and struggling for emancipation. We have to stand with them, and in order for them to stand with us, but also in order to unite us as a society. Everyone's struggle is a common struggle and a shared struggle to sustain life. The second last principle is that of decoloniality. So as we address our past, we must recognize that colonial, neo-colonial, and imperial domination and capitalism is what has unleashed this ecocide on us. This is the logic of capitalism, to dominate society, to dominate nature, to commodify nature, to have nature for profit. So as we move through this climate justice process, we also have to decolonize, and we have to look at different, we have to reject Western conceptions of civilization. and what it means to be civilized and what it means to progress and modernity and all of these things that we have been convinced we are not. We have to reclaim those things. And as we move forward, we have to de-link as we affirm an emancipatory ecology rooted in history, in culture, in knowledge, in indigenous knowledge, and essentially for the wider struggle of the oppressed. And the final principle is that of intergenerational justice. And this is care for planetary commons, not only for our use and our survival now, but for those who are young in this room, but also for those who have not yet been born. This is truly, I think, the fight of this generation is to ensure that we have a world for generations to come. So, yeah. So Vish is now going to go over the alternatives.
I shouldn't be here. It was meant to be Jane, so I'm just standing in for her. So, systemic alternatives for transformative change. So we recognize that there are many ecological crises on our planet, in our life world, but the climate one is the most dangerous one, and if we tackle it, it opens up ways of solving a whole set of other ecological crises. So it's an entry point, if you like. The other point to make is that we don't accept solutions, and we've had this game being played for such a long time. Solutions that prolong the use of carbon, solutions that are false, solutions that perpetuate inequality and basically reproduce the same damn system, okay? So we are rejecting an approach to solutions that are really not about bringing systemic change now. We are also about people's alternatives that have been part of the horizon of struggle. And they don't just do mitigation and adaptation. They do more than that. They help us recover from climate disasters and shocks. They also prepare us to regenerate life-supporting systems. So it's a multi-pronged perspective, if you like, on the challenges. Systemic alternatives are living alternatives. They are part of the living hope on our planet. And many, many people are struggling for these alternatives. They're struggling for them in various parts of the world, but they're also struggling for them at the grassroots in South Africa. And many of these alternatives are seeking to decarbonize societies. So if you just do a thought experiment, before I get into some of the alternatives, if we roll out food sovereignty in South Africa, we can tackle that big 36% of global emissions comes from our food system, for example. So these alternatives are really central to the deep just transition. They're building new systems. And that's what's very, very important. And this has implications for how we live, for our institutions, and for our everyday lives. So the first idea, the first systemic alternative, is to foreground the importance of planning. Okay? Now, in the society we live in, we have this very negative understanding of planning. It's got to do with the Cold War, and it's got to do with red baiting and the Soviet Union and so on and so on, and that's communism. Well, I'm sorry. Planning is still very important. Planning happened in Japan after World War II. Okay? Planning happens in the Pentagon for war games that it plays. Planning happens in McDonald's, etc. Planning happens in societies. And we are saying we want democratic planning. And we want a planning that is affirmed by the voices of the people. And planning has to be done in a way that affirms decarbonization and advance systemic alternatives. The government is talking about planning, but it's not talking about planning that can be driven from below. We need trade unions to shape their workplaces. And that's why we are calling for democratic and participatory planning. We need communities to shape their decarbonization plans, their systemic alternative approaches, etc., from below. The second systemic alternative that we are affirming, which it has been there in struggles, is socially owned and community-based renewable energy through a rapid phase out of fossil fuels. Now, all the science and the technologies and so on are very clear that, you know, if we really move towards a renewable energy system, solar, wind, hydro, tidal, etc., this can dramatically shift us as a society, bring down our carbon emissions, and move us in the right direction. South Africa's energy mix is a disaster. The recent integrated resource plan, well, coal still dominates 60% of our coal mix since till 2030. And that's not where we want to be. There's also a role for efficiencies in this process. There's also a role for us to redirect financing towards renewable energy and so on. I mean, ending fossil fuel subsidies could accelerate, if you like, the renewable energy transition for communities and so on. We also need to, if you like, put the lid, the ceiling on fracking, on offshore extraction and so on, and more coal mines. Right now, government's wanting more coal mines, it's wanting more offshore extraction, etc., etc. It also means that the big energy generators have to step up, given the science, given the urgency, to tell us where they stand on the just transition, and particularly the interests of workers and affected communities. We're also calling for the re-agrarianization through food sovereignty. Every community to work with small-scale farming, agroecological farming to meet their local needs. The research we've done over the 5 years in our activism, looking at the world, looking at what's happening on the continent. There's 600 million small-scale peasant farmers on our continent. And many of them still feed their villages, their towns, their cities, and so on. I was in Asia recently, and I can tell you now, I was in the heart of India. It's still an agrarian society. It's still a peasant-based society. And those peasants still feed that society. So the peasant, the small-scale farmer, is still around. It's not anachronistic. It's not an aberration. Okay? But we have this modern conception. It's the industrial scale farming model that must feed us, and so on and so on. And that's not the case everywhere. We have about 6 million subsistence small-scale farmers in rural South Africa still. Okay, and that's got to do with how the apartheid geography and system developed. We can start there. There are small-scale farmers in inner city spaces. The PHA is a good example of this, and so on. So small-scale farming can fundamentally transform, if you like, our food system. And this is tied to land justice, which is a big issue in our country. Farming has been increasingly concentrated in South Africa. There are fewer and fewer bigger farmers controlling the farming system. And so we have to tackle this challenge, deconcentrate from the standpoint of land justice, but not the way the EFF wants to do this. From the standpoint of fairness, of building solidarity and reconciliation. We need to democratize the water commons. Now we've heard, water is going to be a big issue, and it already is with the drought, multi-year droughts, and so on. So we have good legislation, and that's correct. It declares water a public good in South Africa. But is every South African having their water needs met? Question mark. Okay. So how do we manage the water from our catchment areas, our rivers, our aquifers, our dams? Now we have more private dams in South Africa, over 5,000 private dams that control water. Who alleviated a bit of day zero in Cape Town, Shanaz? The farmers gave a donation to Cape Town. Okay? We cannot go into a climate-driven world with 5,000 dams in private hands. We've got to find a way of sharing all of that water. Okay? We have plus minus 200 public dams and so on and so on. But we also need to re-gear our infrastructure and make sure that we can handle the shock downfalls that are going to come, the heavy downfalls that are going to come, and so on, into our cities and towns, the urban flooding and things like that. So we need systems that can also harvest that water. Massive water will be released from, if we phase out coal, by the way, Eskom uses a lot of water for coal generation, okay? It'll release massive amounts of water for the water commons in this country. If we move away from industrial scale farming, yes, between 62 and 65% of our water is controlled by industrial scale, irrigation-fed agriculture, highly inefficient. If we move away from that, we'll be releasing a lot of water into the water commons and so on. We have to transform the world of work to climate jobs, the solidarity economy, and the basic income grant. So yes, work is very, very important, but the world of work has to decarbonize. So what are unions saying about carbon-free jobs? And they have been saying some good things and progressive things. And climate jobs is one of those ideas that comes from trade unions, okay? And climate jobs are decarbonized jobs, but they are also jobs central to the just transition. They are decent jobs. They are jobs that are linked to lifelong learning and building the capacity of workers. But we also cannot get stuck in the dogma of a productivist way of life where wage earning is the only way to reproduce ourselves as human beings. This comes from the Industrial Revolution, okay? We've got to start thinking differently. And this is where the idea of the solidarity economy, again, championed by waste pickers, garbage collectors, and so on planet Earth, are talking about a different mode, an ecocentric mode of organizing production and consumption and so on through cooperatives. So in Argentina right now, 350 factories are run through worker cooperatives. It's a big part of the Argentinian economy. And it's going to be very interesting to see if the left shift in Argentina, how those factories get strengthened and so on. We also need democratic public utilities. I want to stress this point because we are using a different language in this document. The language we inherited from the National Liberation Movement is nationalization. And it is a bad word because nationalization is linked to state control and state power and disempowering the people. And that is why this idea of a democratic public utility is a very different idea. It's a form of socialized ownership. So let's just say you have a water corporation in Makanda. The water corporation managing the water system in Makanda must have the UPM on the board, etc., etc. People must be able to shape how the commons is used. Okay. We also have to think about the basic income grant. The end of full employment has arrived and it's going to get worse. We have one of the highest levels of structural unemployment in the world, and it is going to get worse with the fourth industrial revolution that the ruling party punts, etc., etc. But the ILO in its data also says that in the coming decades, we are going to have more and more unemployment on planet Earth. So in other words, there are going to be surplus people. So getting a job and through earning a wage to sustain yourself as a human being is over. And that means the basic income grant becomes very, very important to reproduce ourselves as human beings, where we share in the common wealth of society. But what it also means is that it cushions, it provides cover, it provides security for vulnerable communities in the context of climate change, but it also helps workers. This is very, very important. I mean, how do workers leave their jobs in a society in which inequality is worsening, poverty is worsening, and so on? The basic income grant is crucial for a just transition. It helps workers stranded in fossil fuels have the confidence to leave those jobs behind, even the communities, so that there is a cushion. And so the basic income grant is a crucial lever for the just transition in the context of climate change. But it has other benefits as well. Eco-mobility and clean energy public transport systems. So, the Kariki Mensa in South Africa use what? They use donkeys and carts to move around. The carbon footprint of a donkey is way less than a car, okay? Horses are still used in rural South Africa, okay, to move around from villages and so on and so on. Walking is a very important mode of mobility, okay? The moment we became bipedal as human beings, it revolutionized our presence on planet Earth. Bicycles, very, very, very important, okay? So we really need to think about modes of transport that decarbonize our living spaces. Public transport, integrated, intermodal, cheap, accessible, particularly trains, buses, etc., run on clean energy are very, very important. Okay? So we need to build these infrastructures for eco-mobility. Those of you who come out of the ANC, the one thing that it could have done was get public transport right, but it even failed on that. It's pretty useless. It destroyed many other things too. So, the issue of eco-mobility is very, very important. And we also need to think about air and sea transport as well and how we decarbonize that, or rather underline the imperative that it has to be decarbonized or limited, okay? And we have to phase out the combustion engine fossil fuel vehicle, all right? So this is an idea that's there. Zero waste and simple living. The idea of zero waste comes from waste pickers in the world, and they've been thinking about how we revisit the use of materials in economic processes and in society. And the idea is to dematerialize our economies, meaning we don't just extract, produce, consume, and then we go back and extract and so on, but we actually start using whatever we have right now and reuse it, redesign it, etc. And that's very, very important. So zero waste is about closing that loop. It is also, if you like, reducing extractivist activities on planet Earth. It's also about us challenging single-use plastics, but also simple living. Now, simple living is a very, very important idea because in the society we live in, on the consumerist treadmill, bombarded by the advertising industry, etc. Well, you know, it's all about the next gadget, it's about the next throwaway thing, and so on, and so it's highly wasteful. And so this comes back to an ethics about how we need to live as human beings. What is our collective ethics, and so on, about the choices we make? Eco-social housing and transition towns, very, very important. So the cement industry has one of the bigger carbon footprints, by the way, in most modern economies. So how do we move away from using those kinds of building materials? Are there more, if you like, ecocentric materials, lesser impact on the environment and on climate, etc.? And there are lots of natural biomass stuff, etc. we can use in building, and so on and so on. I saw the other day, it was the first wooden multi-story building, I think built in Vancouver or something. Fascinating, okay? So there's some very interesting materials we can bring in, but we also need to think about communities in a much more holistic way. There are a whole set of needs that need to come together, from transport to food, well-being, etc., etc. And transition towns is an idea that's also been championed from below in many parts of the country. In Kwazakele Township, outside Nelson Mandela Bay, there's a transition town effort going on right there. We need to think beyond growth. Our economies are not about serving the needs of people and nature. It's the opposite, okay? It's basically about what capital wants at all costs. So we never think about, you know, people talk about the cost of electricity from Eskom, but we don't factor in the pollution, we don't factor in the waste of water resources, the climate impacts, etc., etc., etc. So we really need to break with this idea of growth dogma, which is at the heart of reproducing the system, while we also go beyond the system. And so there are some interesting ideas around happiness, human well-being, as ideas that should be at the center of how our societies are organized. Ecological debt, worker and public finance for the deep, just transition. You know, the wealthy have basically used resources the most and have polluted the most. They are actually responsible for the broader ecological crisis. The wealthy in this country, but also the wealthy in the global north. And so we really have to start thinking in terms of the ecological debt that's owed and the kind of financial burden. So the wealthy cause the problem and the wealthy must pay. That's the simple argument. And this means that we've got to tax the rich, we've got to tax flying, electric cars. So, you know, people think electric cars are for the rich. Okay, they can afford it, they can buy it, etc., etc. And it'll continue this individualistic ideology of the car. Okay? But we must tax these things. It's a source of revenue for the just transition. A progressive carbon tax on corporations, climate justice tariffs on criminal corporations and governments. I mean, why aren't we imposing a climate justice tax on McDonald's and so on, given Trump's position in the United States, or any other American company inside South Africa, and so on. It's time to push back. Trade unions need to think, and we had this debate in the round table with trade unions. There are trillions of rands in pension and provident funds. And the unions seem to be always on the defensive and harping and getting beaten up and clapped and so on. But here's a lever that unions can use in the just transition. These trillions that are sitting there, why should this bankrupt ANC reach its grubby paws on that money? Unions should shape how pension funds are used in this country, basically. That money can be redirected, it can give unions the power to shape policies, etc., etc. It's a powerful lever. We also have cooperative legislation in South Africa. We have a Cooperative Banks Act, and we can build pools of capital, socialized pools of capital. If we set up one big cooperative bank supported by all the unions, we could have capital in this country that can help communities make that community-owned, socially owned renewable energy transition, and so on and so on. Indigenous knowledge, people science, and technological innovation, very quickly. Here we are affirming different bodies of knowledge. Yes, indigenous knowledge, yes, earth science. We're also saying that we've got to be able to ensure that everyday science and observation also comes to the fore. But we're also saying that technological innovation in the hands of corporations, technology is not neutral. If technology is in the hands of corporations, well, it's about profits, it's about the expense of everything, okay? But if technology is in the hands of the public corporations, in the public interest, driven by the precautionary principle, by an ethics, then you have something else around technology and so on. So we're not anti-technology, we're not anti-innovation and so on, but we've got to mediate these things. The dreams, the future that Silicon Valley has for all of us shouldn't be our dreams, okay? That's the dreams to make the billionaires more rich of us, okay? And then, of course, there's emergency, holistic, and preventative healthcare. There are going to be massive psychological trauma. We are in the process of collective dying as a civilization, okay? Unless we turn it around now. And that's going to have traumatic effects in our societies. And so the healthcare system is very, very important. The ANC's mad version of the NHI is not the answer. We had a great public health system 10 years ago, actually, comparable to many parts of the world. The NHI can be a progressive thing, but we need to build a public healthcare system. That's where the answer lies, actually. And what caused the fall? Centralizing procurement in provincial governments, building corrupt empires, okay? Fleece parasites, I get my blood boiled. But the point is this, is that we can have a public healthcare system that works for the people in the context of a climate-driven world, okay? The rights of nature and natural climate solutions. The rights of nature actually come from indigenous peoples. It comes from our own experience in this country of the Khoi and San. They've been the custodians of the rights of nature for thousands of years, okay? Since the advent of the modern human. And so the rights of nature means that we again have to have this very different relationship with ecosystems. And ecosystems can also teach us how to tackle the climate problem. Yes, I agree with Bob, we can't just plant trees. But we can plant trees within a particular ecosystem, okay, that is indigenous to that ecosystem, etc., etc. We can manage wetlands and peat bogs that are also carbon absorbers, etc., and so on. We can also do various things to our oceans that are part of natural plankton and things like that are very, very important. So there are solutions even in nature that can help us combat this problem. We need a climate-conscious media. Now, despite us engaging SANEF and talking about a climate justice partnership, you can only imagine what a battle it has been to invite the media here. We've sent invites to have SABC here, ENCA here. None of them are interested in coming, okay? So we really have a very serious problem around building a climate-conscious media. And in our engagements with the media, we learned there are resource problems, there are capacity problems, but we need to address those things. The media has to come on board to help us shift society. We're also talking about a climate justice state. And here we're saying recognize the climate emergency, but don't use that to become an authoritarian state, to undermine our democracy and undermine our constitution. Because given the crisis of legitimacy, various forces could use the climate crisis as a pretext to take away our rights and to take away our freedoms. It's a beautiful excuse, actually. So we must defend our democracy, but we're also saying that the climate justice state must enable participatory planning that happens from below. It must develop public financing mechanisms such as green bonds, provide a climate mandate to the Reserve Bank. There's a global debate right now about reserve banks taking on the mandate for climate, and that's happened already in the context of the UK and so on. We also need our tax proposals taken forward. We need progressive regulations that will curtail the destructive logic of capital. So that means we've got to ban certain things, unlike what Montashe is doing. We need to decarbonize all the practices of the state. One of the biggest carbon emitters in the world is the US military. So no matter what's happening at a subnational level in the United States, if they don't stop wars, and there have been uninterrupted wars since 2001, the US military will continue polluting our world, okay? So we also got to decarbonize the South African state in all its activities, the blue light brigades that we see and so on and so on. How do we decarbonize the footprint of the state? We need to rethink the administrative design of the state as well. And here, the challenge is having certain parts of our country unlivable, okay, and that's going to happen. People are going to move. When I did some drought research, I went to the Northern Cape, and those towns are very stressed, okay, unemployed people standing on the streets, etc., etc. And if the water crunch comes, and if the groundwater is used up in an unsustainable way, those areas will not be viable, okay. So how do we redesign the state? And the way we have designed the state, well, we have provinces that bring such profound change to our lives that maybe we don't need them. Maybe we need to build the power and the capacity of local governments as we go forward in a climate-driven world, and so on. We don't have a national fire service in South Africa. In a heating world with fires, we've seen the fires in California and what that's done. It's tested the capacity of the United States. We've seen the fires in parts of Europe, Portugal, Greece, Sweden, fires in Australia right now. Fires are going to be part of the new normal. We don't have a national fire service in South Africa. I interviewed fire chiefs in the Southern Cape because there was a fire from November that lasted 3 months, never caught up in the national news and so on. They didn't have capacity to deal with that fire, okay? We're going to have more fires. So we need a national fire service in this country with incredible capabilities and capacities and so on. We also need a whole set of strengthening of our weather services, disaster management infrastructure. Colleen showed us that tool of the bureaucratic nightmare to even get warnings going. There are going to be more tornadoes coming in parts of the country. How are we going to warn people about this if we have an incapacitated weather service and so on? We need to promote research and innovation. We need to reduce wasteful spending, punish rogue government officials. The rogues must go to prison, to jail. We must end corruption, end political deployments. We need a professionalized state that can serve the people. We need a truly non-racial state in this country. The state shouldn't be a place for jobs for cronies. It should be for the best that can serve the public interest. We also need to advance a climate justice orientation in international relations, including renewing Pan-Africanism, so that we can, as African governments, demand climate justice reparations like Mozambique. I mean, Mozambique is one of the poorest countries. How is it going to rebuild? It's one of many examples on the continent. But also the countries that are locked in and trapped in oil and gas. That's the only thing they have. And if the world wants to move beyond these things, then those African governments have to get some benefits. And hence, we need to be talking about an end fossil fuel treaty and so on. Finally, we are saying people's power for transformative commoning. And here we are saying that if we learn lessons from history, unity, collective power is what makes the difference. We are also saying that people's power must defend the commons that sustains our life. And finally, we are saying we're an intelligent species. We know what the problems are. We heard the science. We also have solutions. But there is a power structure standing in our way, a carbon-addicted power structure. If we are going to solve this problem, then we're going to have to confront this power structure. And already on planet Earth, there are alternatives that are coming to the fore. There is a, if you like, post-climate world being made on planet Earth. It's also happening in South Africa. But the challenge, of course, is that we need to rally and build a powerful mass movement before it's too late. Amanda. Okay, so it's open for... okay.
Okay, so we're not going to open for questions because we are going to break into our groups now and discuss any of your concerns in your groups and then come back for plenary. So that's where the questions will happen. So just a couple of details. So on your name tag, you will have a sticker. That is the group that you're in. So I'm going to now tell you the facilitator that goes with the color that you have on your sticker. Please can you follow that person to wherever they decide that their group is going to gather. You will also be assigned a scribe who will be taking notes and who will report back in plenary. So those two people have already been chosen so that you can just discuss in the groups. You won't have to worry about who's going to report back. So if you have a red sticker, your facilitator is Vish. Okay, so follow Vish. So I think with where the groups are, I think we can have 3 in this room, 1 on the outside in this kind of foyer area by the couches, and then 2 outside. But I'm going to leave that up to facilitators to decide. So red, Vish. If you have a yellow sticker, you are with Awande. Please can you stand up? Oh, yeah. That's Awande if you're a yellow sticker. If you have a dark green sticker, you go with Periel. She's here in the front. If you have a bright pink sticker, you go with William. Please stand up. Okay. An orange sticker will go with Itumaleng. And then a light green bright sticker is me. And then your scribes, you guys know where to go. So the questions are in the program, but I'm just going to quickly go over them. So the first question is, what are the strengths of the charter? So just a couple of, just list a couple of things that you think were strong in the charter. The second part is, what are the weaknesses? What would you add? Or what is there but needs strengthening? Then the third question is, what is missing? So what have you completely neglected and haven't even thought of? And then the fourth is, how can the climate justice charter be used to advance climate justice struggle? So what are the benefits of a tool like a charter? So we will discuss in our groups until, so we've given a lot of time so that we can go in depth and actually read through the charter. So we will do that until 4. Facilitators, please keep to time because we do have to end on time or go to dinner, that kind of thing. So we will end at 4 and then you can go into tea from 4 to 4:30. If you do feel that you still have discussions to have, you can have a kind of working tea where everyone goes to get their tea and then comes back to discuss more. And then at 4:30 on the dot, can we come back for plenary with all of the scribes ready to report back. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So the red ones, come here. Sit here.
Dark green, shall we do the foyer? Dark green in the foyer.
Where is William? William. It's fine.
We need it for